Hey everybody, this is Bo Sanders, and I've been getting some fantastic questions about critical theory, and specifically critical race theory, and what could be the benefit to Christianity. So last week I talked about some responses to the overwhelming themes from my original video on why evangelicals can't do critical race theory. And someone asked in response to this, okay, but what's the upside for Christianity? So I thought of three that I'd like to share with you today. The first is that it breathes new life into a root-bound plant. The second is it levels the playing field. And then the third thing is it's actually modeled on and follows the methods employed by Jesus. So let's talk about this first one with the root-bound plant. Now, admittedly, not everybody has been a part of a community or a congregation, an organization, or an institution that they really loved. But if you've ever been a part of something that really impacted you and that you invested in, but you have seen it become sort of insular and self-referential and inward focused, maybe it's lost its original mission or zeal, that passion has turned from outreach towards inward preservation. It is like a plant that's been in a pot too long, and the roots have begun to grow in upon itself, circling around. So loving the institution or the organization, the congregation, whatever it is, loving it enough at that point is to do the daring thing, which is to undergo the arduous process of pulling that plant out of its pot and beginning to press your fingers in, or a tool, an instrument, and to separate out those roots that have become impacted in order to create room for new life and growth. You got to get a little air in there. This is what critical theory can do for institutions and organizations and even belief systems. This is why the toolbox of critical theory can actually be a good thing for organizations that are too self-referential. It exposes the ideas that have become taken for granted. It challenges the systems and the bylaws, the protocols, the regulations, committees, and boards that are insulated from review or accountability. Critical examination can help loosen that which is bound in tradition and set in its ways and insulated by power and influence. Loving something means not giving up on it and just walking away sometimes. Doing the hard work of critical analysis, or decolonizing perhaps, is a labor of love. The second benefit can be that critical theory levels the playing field. Specifically critical race theory, but critical theory in general can be a great way of examining issues related to access, recruitment, training, funding, and empowerment, to name just a few. Critical theory is an approach that brings a bunch of tools to the project. The goals of critical theory are to examine, expose, and advocate, to change, not just explain, the area of need. And those who practice critical theory have a loose collection of commitments and a general set of approaches that roughly configure them as an approach. Critical theory isn't so much a thing as it's a specific commitment to address a thing. It has an asymmetrical relationship to power. It wants the power to investigate power, and it will shout and claw and demonstrate in order to do so. So we all see the disparities and inequalities that are manifesting in our culture historically and currently threatens to pull apart our society. Critical theory starts with a realization or a conviction that something is wrong with the level of disparity and inequality that we see. Critical theory is concerned about the marginalized, the oppressed, and the left behinds, the unheard, the underrepresented, and the taken for granted. The remainders, as they say. So critical theory wants to know the rules of the game. It wants to ask who wrote the rule book. It wants to interview those that uphold and reinforce the rules. It wants to examine the bank statements of those who profit from the game, explore the possible biases and preferences from those who facilitate the game, interrogate those who seek to exploit the game, expose the unjust practices and policies within the game, and advocate for change to benefit those who actually play the game. One of the ways that critical theory does this is by exposing ideology. That's one of the big words. That's a vocabulary word. That is the mental frameworks that are so entrenched and assumed that someone who holds them and acts on them may not even know that they're there or be able to articulate or explain them or defend them. Ideologies can manifest as beliefs, values, convictions, ideas, opinions, attitudes, rhetoric, prejudices, priorities, rules, laws, standards, regulations, moral codes, spoken and unspoken, motivations, practices, disciplines, rituals, ceremonies, polls, surveys, censuses, political activity, economic policies, legal matters, hiring practices, advertisements, financial investments, beauty standards, sexual permissions, and so many other manifestations and expressions. So ask yourself, what am I not allowed to question? What would I get in trouble for asking? What would my community get angry about if I told our critics? This will tease out that first thread of ideology. It is the fear that if you pull too hard on this thread, that the whole thing might unravel. The third upside of critical theory for Christianity is that it actually reflects the methods and model of Jesus. Jesus both modeled and employed methods that would be very familiar to those who employ critical theory. As Randy Woodley and I say in our book, Decolonizing Evangelicalism, Jesus could be seen as doing a proto-version of deconstruction. Both in his teachings and in his use of parables, Jesus models asking the question behind the question. That's sort of the big thing. Where did you hear that? What was their authority? Why do you think things are the way they are? Do you think that that's the way God wants them? Why do you think that person is your enemy? Can the ring of inclusion be expanded? What really ails you? What's really making you sick? Jesus challenged the status quo. He interrogated the as-is nature of society and its institutions. He advocated for those who were disadvantaged, neglected, marginalized, and discriminated against. Jesus exposed performative religion, calling out the motivations behind posturing and practices in the temple system. He even demonstrated against injustice with violent force. Admittedly, reading the Gospels through a capitalist lens neutralizes much of this emphasis and gives us a much more sanitized and sterilized version of Jesus. That's why it's important to read decolonial perspectives, because the gospel reads very different if you're on the underside of the machine or the underside of history than it does when you're high on the hog, as they say. The Jesus of Empire lacks most of this prophetic witness and critical impulse. That version of Jesus is much more therapeutic than messianic. A post-colonial or anti-imperial reading, however, highlights the proto-critical theory modeled in the life, teaching, and ministry of Jesus. So those are the three benefits that I think critical theory and its approaches can bring to Christianity. It breathes new life into a root-bound plant, it levels the playing field, and it reflects the methods and models of Jesus. So if you're enjoying this series of videos and blog posts, you can read the full transcript of this on the blog and on Facebook probably. But if you're interested, there are now 5 videos related to this in a series, and I'll link to them, about the beauty of critical theory, how critical theory is our salvation from bad religion, why evangelicals can't do critical theory, and then the follow-up to that. So I look forward to your responses. I'm loving being a part of this conversation.